Hello again. So, what to do if you don't feel anything? Somebody asked this question on this channel. I was talking in a recent video about emotional alchemy, emotional literacy, and allowing space for the emotions. And this person raised the question, that's all fine and dandy, but what if I'm allowing space, I just don't feel anything? There's nothing to allow space for. It's indifference, it's numbness, it's things along those lines. What then? That's what I hope to answer in this video. Thanks for tuning in. So, polyvagal theory would suggest that in a situation where someone is experiencing the absence of emotions, indifference, numbness, dissociation, that is most likely to be associated with a state of chronic freeze. Chronic freeze doesn't happen without really trauma of some sort, chronic trauma, typically. And so, borrowing from polyvagal theory and looking through that lens, a few pointers in navigating the emotional landscape or approaching the emotional landscape, which is probably a better term because it seems like there is nothing there, correct? And in that context, then, if you're thinking, well, I need to get to the emotions to heal, how do I get to the emotions if I'm not feeling anything? Then a few principles, a few suggestions. First of all, recognize that, as in the words of Bessel van der Kolk, the body keeps the score. In the words of Wittgenstein, the body, I'm going to get it right and quote him accurately, the body is the best picture of the mind. And so the way to come at the emotional landscape that seems non-existent would be to not necessarily focus on the mind so much as the body. Get into the body, and from there, get closer to what's happening in the emotional landscape. A couple of principles to do this, well, to have in mind when doing such a thing. First of all, okay, we're dealing with trauma. Trauma and the polyvagal theory sets things up hierarchically. So when you're in a chronic freeze state, in order to move up the chain, the next state above that is going to be fight or flight. And so moving out of freeze, by necessity, you're going to move into fight or flight. You're going to have to pass through that. So knowing is half the battle. Knowing that that's what's going to be part of the experience can help one navigate the stormy sea of fight or flight, and just expecting that that's going to be the case. Typically with fight or flight, there's also more anxiety and fear, and so those might be some emotions that might surface in the process first. And then a second thing to keep in mind would be, two principles really that come out of Peter Levine's work in An Unspoken Voice. One principle would be this concept of titration. So titration comes from chemistry. It was the subject of haunting for some of us that went through OChem in order to get to medical school. Basically, a titration type experiment in the lab is when you typically have two compounds that do not behave well when introduced to one another. And so rather than introduce them to one another all at once or abruptly, one very slowly drops in one compound to the other and slowly introduces them together to avoid something volatile like an explosion happening in the lab. Not fun. And so that same scenario, that same concept can apply really in the realm of trauma. When you're going to approach a difficult, traumatic history, past, the best principle to follow would be titration. You're going to slowly approach, cautiously, drop by drop, and in so doing, hopefully not re-traumatize somebody. So that's Peter Levine. That's principle number one. Principle number two would be this idea of approaching using undulation. You go forward, you go back. You go forward, you go back. Right? Compare it to the undulation of the tide coming in, the waves at the seashore that approach and then recede, and then approach a little further and then recede. That's undulation. Even a wave motion itself is undulation in terms of, getting some exposure to something and then backing off, and then exposure and then backing off, to gradually raise tolerance and to help ourselves understand and ground ourselves in something other than the trauma. And then the process really is trying to, separate out, to uncouple the big snowball that is that the traumatic past, the traumatic history, the experience, because the experience is so many things. It was experienced in the body, it was experienced in the mind, it was experienced in all the sensations, the smells, the aroma, the taste, the physical sensations, etc. All of that is sort of a big ball of wax with the trauma. And so if we're talking about emotions in this context, we're trying to get at what the feelings, but the way to get there is through the body. And so, we use the body as a guide, as a map, as information to help understand feelings. And in fact, it's not a hard and fast rule, but if you look at, say, traditional Chinese medicine, you look at different organs that are traditionally associated with certain kinds of emotions, and it's often the case that people have certain sensations connected with certain kinds of emotions. So part of what we're doing in trying to increase our emotional literacy is we're trying to get to a point where we can feel something and not be overwhelmed or taken away with it, or experiencing a flashback, etc. We're feeling it and realizing it's just an energy. It's just emotions are energy, and so it's kind of an energy that maybe we're not that well acquainted with, that we need to become more acquainted with. So those are a few tips. One more piece would be, let me give you a practical kind of thing, exercise to try in order to get closer to what you're feeling. One piece would be to scan your body. Close your eyes, lay down on the couch and gradually move through your body in terms of observing without judgment, key, what you're feeling, what the sensation is physically, or the absence thereof, in a particular part of your body. So you start from the top down or from the bottom up, You start with your toes and move gradually up your body, and ask yourself, what's the information from the interior that I'm experiencing? What is the sensation in my toe right now? Noting in particular areas where you feel more tension, more constriction, versus areas where you feel more openness, more spacious, and even if there are areas that feel collapsed, and as you move through. And then an important piece to observe as well would be if there's a vacancy of a sensation. If there is no sensation, a total absence, a numbness in a particular part of your body, then that might be a clue to what those underlying emotions that you're shut off from might be. So if you're feeling indifference and numbness, that's kind of a vacancy of feeling. Sometimes that can be a permeating sensation throughout one's body. But, for example, it's not uncommon that someone who's experienced sexual trauma, that they have a vacancy of sensation in their pelvic region. It's not uncommon that someone can feel despair and feel kind of collapse in a huge part of their body. And so just noting what those sensations are, even jotting them down in a journal, to begin to have a dialogue with the emotions, with the body, with the sensations. It's pretty common that physically feeling a churning in the stomach, feeling a movement of the bowels, the GI, that can be what fear and anxiety can be experienced like in the body. And so just tuning into that as a starting point can be a way to get to work with the feeling of indifference or numbness, where it's, I'm not feeling something, I'm not feeling emotions, I'm not sure what those are, to increase emotional literacy. Realize too that this whole exposure and increasing of emotional literacy is a process. So just like when we were children and we got our first box of Crayola crayons and had 8 colors, and you were able to express yourself and draw as a child, and then at some point there weren't enough colors, and you realized that having the burnt sienna in addition to the brown gave you nuances with the 48 choices in the Crayola box of colors, that those nuances helped you better express. As we learn emotional literacy, as we increase our awareness, as we get back into our bodies, we're trying to expand from a box of 8 Crayola crayons to 48 to 64 even one day. And we do that through the venue of the body. Thank you for tuning in. Adieu.